Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for taking time out of your Sunday to attend this webinar. My name is Gabby Owusu-Ansah. I'm a fourth-year medical student here at Tulane going into anesthesiology. So just wanted to give a brief overview of the Gladden Society. So the Gladden Society is an organization whose mission is to enhance diversity in the field of orthopedics. And that's done by promoting mentorship and guidance throughout your career. As Dr. Wells said, as well as just forming a large connected network of Black orthopedic surgeons from all over. And since the Universal Interview Offer Day for this year is next Monday on the 14th, we wanted to host this event beforehand just to provide some tips on how to thrive and still stand out during this era of Zoom interviews. So welcome and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gabby. That was a great introduction. My name is Ingrid Okonta. I am a medical student at University of Louisville School of Medicine. I'm also on the Gladden Society social media team with Gabby. So thank you guys so much for coming today. We have a great panel today. So please, thank you guys for agreeing to be our panel. Briefly, before I get started, the panel will introduce themselves, say their names, say where they went to med school and residency, or if they're attending, what institution are they at right now. So any one of our panelists can start.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and give it a start. First off, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Gladden Society, for having me. It's pretty awesome to be here and this time on the other side of things. But my name is Tino Mukuru-Mbindo. I actually went to undergrad at HBCU in Alabama called Oakwood University. I went to University of Louisville where I did my MD and my MBA. And now I'm currently an intern at the Harvard Combined Orthopedic Residency Program in Boston, Massachusetts. Super excited to be here and just kind of share my perspective. So welcome and thank you for having me.
Can I put a go Cards? Because Tina went to U of L too, so go Cards, put that out there. Next panelist.
Sure, I can go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Dr. Christian Payan. I'm currently one of the orthopedic trauma surgeons on staff at Duke University School of Medicine in Durham, North Carolina. Went to undergrad at Georgetown University in DC. Went to medical school at Mount Sinai, New York. And then did my residency at NYU, where I was in the strategy and policy track for that residency, and have a concurrent role in the Health Policy Center here now at Duke, which started during residency. And then I did my fellowship last year in Boston at the Harvard Orthopedic Trauma Program, split between MGH and Brigham. Definitely very excited to be on this webinar. It is definitely a different landscape than it was even 2 or 4 years ago. People are still making snap judgments about you as an applicant when they meet you on these webinars. And there's a lot of advice, I think, that we can hopefully glean from the folks who have navigated the process successfully throughout the duration of this webinar tonight. I'm excited to answer all your questions and be a contact and resource for anybody who wants to reach out.
Is Dr. Chambers here?
I am. Hello, everyone. Okay. I'm Monique Chambers. I hail from the West Coast, Los Angeles. Pretty much did most of my training up and down California, undergrad at University of La Verne in SoCal, and then did medical school at UC Davis, where I was on the admissions committee there for the medical school, and then subsequently completed a health law degree at UC Hastings School of Law and in Sacramento. And then since that time, have spent time in 4 different hospital systems working. And I'm currently a 4th-year orthopedic resident at Baylor, where I'm on our admissions committee here for medical school. So lots of opportunities for sure. I agree the landscape is completely different from the in-person interviews versus the virtual interviews. And absolutely everybody on this call, there is an immediate snap judgment made about you and other applicants as soon as your camera pops up. So as soon as they see your name, really. And so I think that's even more important, not to scare, but to provide information to really empower you to sit in the comfort of your home and really be able, I think, to showcase yourself a little more than you otherwise would. So there's pros and cons to the landscape. My goal is to help you embrace the pros of it today.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much for those introductions. So just a brief overview of how tonight's going to go. We have a list of pre-populated questions that we'll ask the panelists first, and hopefully that covers kind of the majority of questions that commonly come up. And then about the last 30 minutes of the event, we'll take additional questions that you might have that we may not have already answered. And if you have a small question that we can answer quickly, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll work for one of us to be answering questions in the chat as well while the panelists are speaking. And then if you have a longer line question, we'll defer that to the panelists to answer at the end of the event.
All right. So I'll start with our first question. And for the panelists, just for the sake of time, not everyone has to answer the question. So if you feel strongly about the question, you can, but maybe one or two people can answer each question. So our first question is, how should we advertise our interest in the location of a program if we have no physical or family ties to that city?
I think the virtual landscape can actually play to your advantage quite a bit because it makes people a lot more accessible in ways that they weren't before. I always tell people, like, when you go through this process, it's really important to strategize. And so as I'm speaking today, I'll reference this, but essentially before you get to your interview, the biggest thing is just trying to get a job. And by doing that, it's important to have as much information as possible. So just reaching out to residents and just kind of talking about who you are and what you are about. Asking them questions, getting in touch with them, like DMing them on Twitter, on Instagram, without being really excessive, I think can be a really great way to do so because everyone's accessible at this point. And as they get to know who you are, they're going to speak about you. And so I've heard multiple times throughout my program where I hear, oh, this person reached out to me. Do you know who this is? They said they know you. And so now they have a tie. And then now your name is going to come up in multiple situations. And so I just think that's all pretty important as you're kind of going through the process. Like, take advantage of the accessibility that people have right now.
Yeah, and I think what another component of that is leveraging your network, right? It's really hard for me when I'm reviewing applications, especially Durham, North Carolina, if I see somebody who's done all their training in California and Chicago, and I don't see a rotation near the area, and I haven't heard from a colleague that this person is interested in the program, it's so competitive now that we're looking for reasons to put people in the do not interview pile. So, I can say one successful tactic that I had a medical student employ this year was, even though they didn't get a chance to rotate at our institution, they had previously reached out to me to conduct research, a simple research study, a systematic review. And that put that student on my radar. Then they asked to set up a Zoom, very politely. And even though I was busy, kind of looped in my administrator and we set up a Zoom call. He sent me his CV, and now we'll see, but I think he's going to get an interview because I got to know him a little bit through that experience in a short amount of time. I mean, this is over the last few weeks. It's not always feasible to do that, but I also think getting in touch with residents where you know them is another way to signal your interest to a place that you may not have physical or personal ties to if you didn't have the chance to rotate there.
Okay. So the second question, how should we go about asking about support for minority residents? I think this is like a big question that gets, asked a lot, and how should we navigate that?
So you're talking to clinicians, half of them probably researchers. And thankfully, we have numbers to attach to this information now, right? So you can ask a data-driven question that has to do with the fact that there is depending on what specialty you're going into, there's somewhere between a 3 and a 17-fold increase in remediation and dismissal for our students of color. And so that information is out there, it has been presented multiple times, it has been published. And so you can, obviously as a African-American woman, that's not an unheard question for me to bring up and to say, obviously, I'm more committed to my success than anyone else. It's not only important for me to match to the right place, but to match to a place that's committed to my success in finishing. Have you had students that have had difficulty with that path or trajectory, and what has kind of been the program's commitment to making sure that those students successfully matriculate through? Now, you want to make sure that you ask it in a way that doesn't cause them to think red flags about you, right? And that says, well, are you somebody that we're going to have to remediate necessarily? But you do want to be in a place where, and I think the climate is such that the tide has kind of turned where these conversations are not as taboo. I think discernment is required based on the interviewer that you're speaking with at the time. But it's not unheard to flat out ask that question now. I know at Baylor, we flat out get the question, but we're also a program that is committed to diversity. We're a program that has successfully matriculated and graduated all of our people without remediation. If you get feedback that is extremely uncomfortable, is not what you wanted to hear, you have to take that with a grain of salt to say, is this a program for me? I can't tell you how many people we have advised that they not land in a place that now they are in trouble in that place. And so, I think you have to be careful with how you word it, which is why we're talking about some of the ways that you can attach some of the data to it. But I also think you need to be wise if you're getting an answer that doesn't rest well with you. That may not be a place you want to be.
Yeah. I think that in general, programs are much more amenable to these kinds of questions now. Do you think you have to pick your spots, obviously, and do your research beforehand, right? Like, look at the roster of the residents at that program. Like, do you see faces that look like your own? If you don't, in today's day and age, there might be a reason to that. Look at who your faculty interviewers are. Ask about the institution and the program's commitment to equity and diversity, right? And I think we are in a place where you can ask flat out, what kind of resources are there to support residents who come from diverse backgrounds, and choose the right faculty member to ask that question from, and then gauge their response, and that will inform you, I think, in a lot of ways. And reach out to the residents again, because they have a lot of insight that the faculty is not always going to divulge or be cognizant of or aware of. And do your research.
Actually, I wanted to add one thing to that. Is like, as minority students, which I'm sure the majority of this panel are, we have like an added burden, not to say burden, but we have an added aspect to our application. Everyone around us is trying to match into orthopedics, and we're trying to match into orthopedics and match into a program that's going to support us. And therefore, our strategy should be a little bit different. Meaning that I basically broke my interview process down in half. The first half, which was before the interviews, my goal was to get a job. I didn't care if I was going to match at number one versus, whatever number was going to be on my rank list. I wanted to get a job, which meant that I asked questions about programs. I try to understand the programs, and I try to understand the residents. And in that time, I could ask superficial questions about, diversity, whatever, but during that time, my goal was to get a job, to have them be willing to endorse me. And then once I did that, I was able to pick aside who are my allies, who are the people that I can trust, who are the people that are going to be truthful with me. And then after I interviewed, that's when I went back and asked those more difficult questions to the person that I could trust after that was done. And I really want you guys to kind of think about that strategy, because sometimes we're so caught up in one aspect of our application. We miss out on key thing here, which is becoming an orthopedic surgery resident. And I don't want anyone to miss out on that. And while it's great to go to your number one program or your number two program, a lot of people don't match at that place. And so it's good for you to be able to stratify what is going to be in your best interest based on the application you have and the interview offers that you have. Sorry, Steve, my niece is in the background just enjoying, it's quality time here in Boston. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was great. Okay, so the next question, I would say, just to change the pace of the questions, are programs allowing applicants to visit in person and meet faculty? If so, and we are unable to attend in person, what can we do to still show interest or stand out? So now that it's virtual, are they still allowing people to come in person, basically? Is that a thing?
There are some programs that are allowing that to happen. It's very institution specific. So you'll have to reach out and see what their institution policies are. If there's somewhere that you're extremely interested in, I'm in the fellowship process right now. And so I'm in a very similar boat as all of you all. And for me, like my top 3 to 5 programs, I plan to go visit. I actually spent a vacation in June visiting 2 of them, 2 Harvards actually, where our other 2 panelists. So I went to check out the MGH and the BWH program, chose to spend my vacay there. And they were very open to me coming. But there are some places that they'll tell you, flat out, our institution is not accepting visitors still. And I think bouncing back on some of the things that we've already said in terms of how to show interest, reach out to people that are currently there, use social media to your advantage. Nobody knows how to do that better than your generation. So absolutely, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and follow up with a real email. Just don't depend on social media. I would use those as kind of avenues to get in maybe with residents. If there are very active attendings on social media, I think that's totally appropriate. But you do want to follow up and so that you kind of shift and they shift in their mindset on how they view you as a professional. But yeah, definitely falling back on some of those old things that we already talked about just for the purposes of time. I think they all apply in terms of showing your interest.
Yeah, the policies are in flux here. But I think that after your interview, it's perfectly reasonable to just send an email to someone that you had a good connection with and inquire, because it can't be seen in a negative light. If you really can't make it and the opportunity is offered to travel to a place, then, ask for an alternative, a Zoom, follow up, something that shows your interest and have a compelling reason for why you can't travel when others are going to make the effort to, if there is a second look opportunity or something like that for a program you're interested in.
I'm sorry to keep adding this third answer, but I feel like you got to get your bag. I went and I saw programs. Thing is, there are a lot of policies in place, but a lot of programs aren't following those policies. And so I went and got mine. And so for applicants, if you feel very strongly about going to a place, reach out to the residents. And remember I was in Chicago and I hit up one of the residents. I was like, hey man, I'm in town. Let's just grab some coffee or something. And he ended up spending some time showing me around at the program over there. And so it's up to you to get what you want to get. And my take on it was, if it was somewhere that I felt really strongly about and I cared enough to, I found a way, because I feel like it pays off.
Okay, so you heard that. There's no excuse, make a way. So the next question I would say, what should you do to stand out in a virtual setting? Like some people, what type of background should you have? Is there anything particular that you did during your interview process?
So I just finished interviewing, so I kind of give my take on it. There are a few things that you can do to stand out. The first thing is poise. Everyone is nervous about virtual interviews. You're not different in that capacity. So you just having the poise when you come into the interviews. You're not sitting there stiff. You're not sitting there like, I shouldn't be here. I should be shaking. But you come in just confident. That goes a long way. The next thing is just having confidence, but you can portray confidence in small ways. Like, for example, if someone asks you a question, you pause and you just let it sit there just for a second. That shows, again, poise, and that shows confidence. And that also makes you stand out. The other thing is camera should always be on if you're going into any virtual meeting, because people are just sitting there bored, they're looking and they're seeing names and they're making recognition as to who you are. So you kind of miss out. So if you see there's a chance for you to be at a program or do something, your camera should always be on. You should always be looking clean and proper. And just kind of think about it that way. None of the, I'm holding my phone, everything is all over the place. You got to be concise in that way. And then I feel like the biggest thing also, and I credit my co-resident who interviewed with me, who told me this, is you have to ask intelligent questions. I truly believe that there are some questions that aren't intelligent. And those are the questions that show that you didn't put any research as to what you were asking. Information is available on the website, it's on there. And so you can ask questions like, instead of saying like, what is your program doing to improve the diversity? You can say, hey, you know, I talked to Dr. So-and-so, a resident there. I talked to alumni there. And they told me that since they were at the program, this has happened, that has happened. I noticed your website mentions this and that. And I just wanted to ask, are there other things in the future that are happening? And it will give you a very different answer, an answer where someone's going to be a lot more engaged, and they're going to remember who you are, because that's the type of resident you're going to be. You're going to be inquisitive. You're also going to do your part in it. And people are looking for these subtleties to figure out, how can you differentiate people?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of just practical advice, right? You want to be in a well-lit area. You want to be well-dressed, tie on, speak with poise and confidence, certainly. But make sure you don't toe the line between confidence and arrogance. You know, we're looking for competent humility always. And the further along you get in this career path, the more you're going to embrace those words, competent humility. And we're looking for those characteristics early. So that's definitely a big part of it. Avoid fidgeting or turning side to side, you know, in your chair. These are all signs that you're nervous. Get rid of the cat and the dog, you know, when we all have different responsibilities, but make the best effort to try to be in an isolated location. There are certainly ways to showcase some things in your personality, I think in a way that is subtle and tasteful. You know, you can have your degrees in the background. You can have a guitar in the background. If you play it, just be prepared to play it on the interview. I think there are small things like that you can do, but first and foremost, well lit, excellent broadband internet connection. You don't want to be going in and out. Hammer on the entire time. Avoid the fidgeting. Pause. Have a good cadence and a pleasant demeanor, and that's going to go a long way in and of itself.
Okay, so tips for how to avoid Zoom fatigue during the interview season.
I might be a little too far removed from this one to advise.
It's called practice.
So
it's called practice. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interject this. It is called, my young brothers and sisters, it's called practice, practice, practice. You will be better off if you practice continuously. This is your careers. And I'm in this career now 30 years, and I still practice. So before I came on the line here tonight, my brothers and sisters, my wife said, go put a tie on. So I have my shirt and my tie on, because again, I want you to see the first impression of me. Many of you have never met me before. My first impression, I only get one shot at a first impression. And so I'm making it. So you all are strong. You all can do it. There's no question in my mind that you can do it. You have your network here. You have your club. Your club is right here. So you get to meet all and greet all these brothers and sisters here now. Take notes. And I don't care where you are on the planet, there will be somebody for you to reach out to. And that's part of my goal, is for you to have that network and those resources to you wherever you're on the planet. So you are never alone. I'm sorry. Thank you. Go forward, Dr. Chambers.
Hey, Io, can I add something?
I'll start. Go ahead, Kev.
KP.
Go,
Hey.
KP.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kev. I'm one of the adult reconstruction fellows at Duke. I'm on the Gladden Society social media team. I think one of the things you can do to kind of avoid, the fatigue in the Zoom setting is last year when I was interviewing for arthroplasty fellowships, I had scheduled a lot of them like the same day or the following day. You get real tired doing that, So I would say try to space them out as much as you can, I think having too much in one little 3-day setting could really wear on you. It came to a point I was just like, man, this is boring. Like, I hate this, So just try to schedule like 1 a week or 2 a week if you get that opportunity,
And when I was going through, I actually, really simple advice, but try to enjoy each one and focus on each one as you're going through. So rather than being like, I have all these interviews that I got to get through, and in my mind, I'm already tired. It's like going into a workout, looking at the script, and you're like, man, I got to do all this. Maybe I shouldn't even go to the gym. And so what I did was I focused on the interview that was coming up. And then once I got through that, I focused on the next one, and I focused on the next one. And while doing so, I also try to have fun with it. Like I would message my people who were interviewing with me. Like if something funny happened, I'll like, say something to them. I'll just say hello or like comment on something that they said. So that way it wasn't like just the same thing all the time. So it just makes the process a lot easier if you like try to have fun with it and then just try to focus on the next step, because you prepared well enough to like, or you should have prepared well enough to not have to worry about that so much.
All right. Thank you. Gabby, I think the last question is we answered that. So I'll have you take over. Thank you.
Okay, so next question. What things should we look out for to get a feel for the sense of community in a program if we're not able to visit in person?
I think you have to reach out to the residents. They're going to give you the best insight on what a program is like. It's hard to get a sense for the culture of a program, even after the interview, because everyone's putting their best foot forward, in the interview process, and they all want you to believe that it's the best program out there. And it could be, but the best program out there isn't always the best program for you, if that makes sense, depending on what kind of person you are. So I would say reach out to residents, both early and late residents. Like if you can find a late PGY1 or early PGY2, those are good people to ask about the call schedule, or, kind of like what the support is like, or what happens when somebody is, out on vacation, and then try to find a PGY4 or 5 and see if, if they're giving a sense of bitterness about the program, or if they feel like they're not supported. They're going to give you the most candid insight about the program, I think, and give you the best sense of the culture. You can definitely get a sense of the culture a little bit from people's brochures and from the interview day itself. NYU, where I went to residency, they don't hide it, right? It's a very formal program. This is a work hard, blue collar place, and that speaks to the culture, of the place as well. They prioritize work ethic over everything else. And then other places are just different. And I think unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get the best sense from faculty. Do try to find residents, or if you have a good connection with a faculty member, somebody who's going to be candid with you, then reach out to them either during the interview or after, if you feel that connection, to follow up with them and ask those questions that get at the hidden curriculum, if you will.
I feel like asking asking questions about the day-to-day activities is a lot more indicative as to what it's like there. So it's like, you're talking about community or like support, or like what residents are doing for fun. Like ask like, man, like if you like to play ball, like, hey man, where do you hoop at? And you hear the resident like struggling to answer that question, they probably aren't doing the thing that they love as much, and they may not be as happy. Or like a lot of programs who were in like, more remote areas, they would talk about how it was a 2-hour drive from this major city and 2-hour drive. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm in residency, I'm not taking a 2-hour drive anywhere since I started, and I can't foresee that happening. And so like trying to like ask about the subtleties as to what is your day-to-day like, who are you all hanging out with, or do you live close to your co-residents? And if you start to notice, for example, they mention all the same things, and there's not a lot of like deviation from it. That can key you into like smaller things. And I feel like for Zoom, the key to the game here is like subtleties, like what is being said versus what's not being said. And you just get better with that with time.
So 2 things. One, most places still host a night before social via Zoom. Make sure that you attend that. Remember, it is part of the interview process, so you show up appropriate. But that's a real nice opportunity to get a sense, at least of the residents within the program. And then 2, the other thing I would say is a lot of places have an open resident room between the mini sessions. And just getting a sense of how those residents are talking and communicating when they're not actually talking directly to you is also a nice opportunity to get a real sense of the program. I mean, be surprised the things that come up. And this isn't even just at our program. I've been on other ones and heard things from med students where they're talking about their attendings, they're complaining about X, Y, and Z. You know, you really get a sense of if it's a gossiping program, if these people hang out with each other outside of the OR and outside of their clinical duties and responsibilities. And then are they paying attention to you, or are they spending a ton of time just talking to each other? That says good and bad things, right? About one, their recruitment efforts, but then two, what is the nature of those conversations? So I think those are two ways to really kind of have a bird's eye view and glean some things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to in the formal one-on-one settings.
Okay, next question. This was addressed a little bit before. So some programs encourage students to send follow-up and thank you emails, while some programs are very intentional about discouraging it due to the high volume of applicants. For those programs, how would you advise navigating it to continue to show interest, but of course not to do the opposite of what they say to do?
If they say don't do it, don't do it. Again, places are looking for reasons to knock you off their list. If they explicitly state they don't want it, don't give them a reason to knock you off the list. If you know somebody because you did the work beforehand, like we've told you to do the work beforehand, then you can already reach out to people, one, before the interview. But there's some places that creep up on you, right? Like they were a number 9 on your list and all of a sudden you interview and now they've shot up. Pretty much everywhere that is on your list that you are interviewing at, you should reach out to somebody beforehand, because now that means you have an in with somebody afterhand, no matter what. And so that is an opportunity for you to be able to communicate to them, hey, y'all are my number 1 program. But if they explicitly say don't send an email, don't send an email, guys. These are the basics of hierarchy in surgery. If I tell you to do something, I need to trust that you will do it.
Yeah, I would second that. If a program says not to do a specific thing, like send an email to the program director, then don't do it. The backdoor entry might be if you had a good connection with the resident, just, getting a connection with them, texting them. I ask the residents a lot of times about the medical students and take their word more than anybody else's, because they spend the most time with you. They saw whether, if you rotated, they saw you be ready with splitting supplies or show up late, either end of the spectrum. So that's kind of maybe like a backdoor way to express interest in a program without disobeying the order not to email faculty specifically. But I think that the first and foremost rule is if they say not to, just don't do it.
Okay, next question. So what topics are generally off limits, both for us to ask as students as well as for interviewers to ask us? And how do we go about declining to answer a question we may not feel comfortable answering?
So when I was kind of like going through, I answered the portion as to how to answer those questions. I think in an ideal world, people aren't going to ask you legal questions. In an ideal world, people are going to follow guidelines, but unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. And so, first strategy that I want to share with you all is if you get a question, for example, that's controversial, like someone asking me about Black Lives Matter, as well as abortion, you don't have to pick a side. You can actually just tell both perspectives and just leave it at that. So, for example, I was asked about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I said, wow, some people just really feel this is a difficult part of the country and they think that, this shouldn't be a thing. And other people really feel strongly about this. I'm just interested to see how things are going to turn out as time goes on. And just leave it at that. You don't have to answer those questions, but sometimes declining can hurt you, or can seem combative to some people, or they may not like that. And so I think that's just really important to kind of think about as you're kind of going through.
Yeah, there's certainly questions that interviewers should not be asking. I mean, these controversial topics really should be off limits. If you're a woman resident or medical student, nobody should be asking you about whether or not you're planning to get pregnant during residency. So that's completely inappropriate. And how you navigate that, I think that Tina's approach is perfect. even if it sometimes feels uncomfortable, you kind of thread the needle. Either don't answer and just say kind of casually that you're not comfortable answering, or talk about both sides and just say we'll see and make a mental note of that. If it's a really offensive, out of line question, just maintain your composure, try to navigate your way through it best as you can with diplomacy. And I would say reach out to somebody and report that. You can definitely report some of these things.
So I just wanted to add, don't let them ever see you flustered when these situations happen. Just take it with grace. If it feels so uncomfortable and it's bothering you, just sit back, and just pause. And then get yourself together, because they're making note as to how you react to this. If they see your face change, they see your demeanor change, your body language change, that hurts you. And that might be just one person in a program that's phenomenal. And now you count out on a great opportunity because you locked in on that one person. So just with that situation, kind of keep that in mind, because it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen, unfortunately. And I'm getting being long-winded, but another thing I did was I went online and I got a list of illegal questions, whatever I could find on Google. And then as I was driving, I practiced answering them. So when they asked me, I'd already heard that because I'd already asked myself that. So I already had something in mind as to how to go about it as I was preparing. So that's another strategy you can use as you're going through.
So there's formulas for these questions, which is exactly what he's describing. You depersonalize the question, you acknowledge it first, depersonalize it. So it basically separates some distance between the discomfort and you. And then you leave the possibility open for both options to be completely accurate, and the possibility of the future and kind of your interest or lack of interest in the question. So it's literally a proven formula. It is written in books for how to deal with difficult questions. And that's what he just described. So find ways definitely to, and especially if there are sore spots for you personally, right? Because sometimes these questions are inappropriate questions that they just shouldn't be asking. And then there's other questions that actually are a completely appropriate question, but for some reason it rubbed you the wrong way. We all have biases. We're walking into the room with them, just like interviewers are walking into the room with them. Identify and know your biases ahead of time so that you can appropriately address those conversations. And I cannot echo more the one word that he said, do it with grace. You are walking into a field and into a specialty where I'm a Black woman in Texas. I'm from California. You guys, I cannot tell you the number of conversations that happen around that OR table that are completely inappropriate and offensive to me. And there are ways that you have to learn how to deal with these things that show up without shrinking your own identity, but also let other people know that there is a time and place for these conversations that I can engage with, and I can engage with grace, and we can get back to this case. All right. So it's a gift. You have to practice with people that are comfortable with you, practice with people that know your defense mechanisms, and with people that know, you start to talk faster when you get offended. You start to fidget a little more. You're drinking your water, all of a sudden your face frown. There's some people that have a sarcastic humor when they get asked an offensive question. They kind of, have this weird smile that you're smiling. And so you think they don't know, but you just told everybody exactly where you stand on this issue before you said a word. So absolutely empower yourselves to, one, be yourselves, but two, you have to be able to engage in conversations with people that don't look like you, think like you, talk like you, will never understand you, and still walk out of it with them respecting you. That's the goal. And again, you're trying to get a job. Get your job. You can have those conversations later.
Thanks, Dr. Chambers. I'm from California too.
I love that. Yeah. And I think, answer with grace, get back to the case. This kind of thing happens your whole career too. I mean, just Friday, two of my patients in the holding bay asked me what country I was from. And I'm like, so, you have to be able to mask some of the uncomfort and the discomfort that comes with the territory. And answer with grace, get back to the case. I think it's fantastic. I might steal that.
I mean, it's all of residency, learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. The sooner you learn it now, it'll make the next 5 years a lot easier.
Yeah, those are really fantastic answers. Definitely dropping some gems for that question. Next question is concerning red flags on an application. So if an applicant has any red flags, should they bring it up first, if at all, to try and maybe control where the conversation goes, or refrain from discussing unless asked?
My vote is in the latter category. I just think that we are more likely than not to bring up that red flag with you anyways. And that's going to be your opportunity. You just have to rehearse your answer. If you know you have a red flag on your application, you know you're going to be asked about it. Just practice what you're going to say, have your reasons, your explanations in a very succinct and eloquent answer prepared. And that's all you can do. I don't know about, and I'm interested in hearing the other panelists' opinions, but I think that bringing it up unprompted is I think maybe not the way to go. That's just my opinion. Because candidly, like I may have missed it in the review of your application, and then maybe I don't want to, and then you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Yes, I will absolutely jump in here. So some of you know a little bit of my story. But I was diagnosed with a brain tumor as a second-year med student, had significant memory loss, was diagnosed a week before step 1, did not do stellar on step 1, and then I had a 5-year break between medical school and the time that I matched into orthopedic residency. So you talk about a red flag. When I tell you, most people that hear my story, you would think I planned the 5 years between the time that I graduated medical school and the time that I matriculated into residency. And why is that? It's not because I had this glorious plan that I was working, I kind of did, but it's because I've learned how to master my answers, and I have owned my story in a way that makes it sound like one success after another. And so if there are any of you that actually have those kind of things in your application, I do coaching for this. I would be happy to spend some time with you offline learning how to give your 2-minute elevator speech. But I agree, I would not necessarily bring it up unless, for me, I would bring it up, but I would only bring it up in one way. At the end, when they say, is there anything on your application or is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to make sure to mention? Okay, or that you want to make sure we know about. And again, it depends on what your red flag is and what your reason is. Like, I mean, I had a stellar comeback story, if you will, and I'm confident in that, right? Like there's a way to show up. You have to know who you are and what you're bringing to the table. And so I knew that the things that I was bringing to a residency program were assets over my colleagues. And if I did not have the opportunity to tell them my version of that story, it would be looked at as a red flag when it really had empowered me to be one of the best residents that I could ever be. And I don't know any other adversity that could have, gotten me there. And I don't know that I was a better resident before having gone through all of what I went through. So for me, that was important. However, if it was just one of those things in isolation and there wasn't, a consistent theme that kind of tied together part of who I was or what I was bringing to the table, no, I wouldn't have brought it up and I wouldn't have. But, for me, it actually was the first statement in my personal statement. Even now in my fellowship application, my very first statement is, am I bald? Right? Because I woke up after brain surgery bald. And so I don't hide from it at all. But again, you have to really be sitting in your splendor and confidence to be able to address those things with grace and in a way that doesn't cause more questions. So again, if anyone wants help kind of couching those answers, I'm happy to work with you offline.
I think you just need to determine also what is a red flag versus what is a yellow flag. There are certain parts of your application that you may feel don't make you the best candidate. Let's say you have a 236 step 1 score, and you feel like, now I'm not going to be competitive, I should bring this up. It probably will hurt you more than it would help you. Like Christian was saying, like, that might have been missed or that might have been overlooked because there are other aspects of your application that were just solid and they still chose to interview you. But let's say you had a tough step score that was 215 and you know that everyone might love you, but as they sit there in the application process and they have people who are much higher, they may say, maybe let's not. And so, I think it's just important to discern what are red flags and what are yellow flags, and just reach out to your mentors and your advisors to discuss those things, because they're going to be able to give you a real perspective as to what matters versus what doesn't.
Very solid advice on that question. So the last pre-populated question we have is on the topic of hair. So any advice or things that should be done, should not be done? We often get feedback, a lot of different feedback from different people, depending on who you ask, relating to anything pertaining to beards, braids, straightening your hair, natural hair, and the like. So we would definitely like to hear from you all and your different perspectives on that topic.
So it's an interview. Show up as appropriately as you would to any interview. I would keep in mind, though, that on camera, colors look differently. And there's like a fuzz that happens with our hair sometimes. And two things contribute to it. One, whether or not you just put a little oil on to get rid of those flyaways. I'm talking about for men and women. You guys have actually seen it more with men on virtual interviews. So if you wear your hair short or curly, and you're a guy, be aware of that. Some of it also has to do with the angle that you actually have your camera at. So play with that angle to get rid of some of that fuzz, because it is just distracting. It doesn't give, the best image of you. Make sure if you're a woman, or really if you're a woman and you have long hair, get it up out of your face. It's okay if you wear your hair down. But you don't want anything distracting, nothing flying in front of or over your eyes. You want them to see you. You want to be able to communicate flawlessly. Anyone that knows me knows I usually have a hair flower in my hair. If you do anything that is an accent, you don't want something super distracting. I would never do something like this probably in an interview. So keep it clean, keep it together. Act like you're in person, but be aware that there are distractions that happen on the computer that aren't necessarily appreciated in real life. And while we're on that, just some small little kind of technical tips with things. Look at everybody on this screen right now. Some people, all you really see is their eyes. Some people, you see their face and it is consuming the entire screen, right? And then there's some people that you kind of see a little bit of their shoulders. You want something that's appropriate, that looks like you are conversational. All right. You don't want to be too far into your camera. You don't want them looking at all your pimples, everything like that. Back up, sit comfortably, right? Like you don't want to be lounging either. So I wear a back brace. It helps me sit up straight in these interviews, in these Zoom sessions. It's something so small. I wear it all the time, really, but it's something so small that, when I'm in a Zoom session, it's something small that I do. Why? Because it pulls my shoulders back. It makes me sit up straight. If you do a turtleneck in, you can see this is a better image than anything else you've seen me in tonight. Now you want to be comfortable. However, these are small things that you can practice, guys, because it does make a difference in how you show up and how you look on screen. Earrings, make sure that it's not distracting. If anything has a dangle, get rid of it. They can hear that. Every time you move your head, people can hear that. So small tips just to throw out there.
Yeah. I used to have dreadlocks like down in my chest, and I cut them right before my interviews. I kept them throughout all med school, and I cut them right before the interviews. And, I have mixed feelings about having done that. But the reality is, less than 3% of the surgeons in this field are Black or come from an underrepresented background. I think that today we're in a time where, err towards clean and conservative, but own your identity at the same time. You shouldn't feel bashful or shy about wearing a traditional headdress or anything related to your culture, your religion, or your identity. So I think just err towards conservative. If you do wear earrings and you're a male, I would maybe consider ditching them for the interview. Unfortunately, you just have to think about who's interviewing you, and the chances are they're somebody who's conservative, white, and male. Like that's just the reality, and the attitudes and perspectives that they're going to have towards you are influenced by your appearance. And it is what it is. You have to, try to stand out and blend in at the same time, right? Like people are going to look for things to identify with you as an applicant. Other little technical tricks for the virtual interview. everything that Dr. Chambers is spot on. Like the angle of where your computer is says a lot about, about what you look like during the virtual interview. I think that the blurred background is actually maybe a no-go for a lot of virtual applicants. If you can have a professional backdrop, that's well lit, that's favorable. I think that this distance is probably best, shoulders and kind of chest area showing, your tie that you're wearing, if you decide to wear one, is showing, very professional dress and nothing distracting. Anything that's in your background or that you're wearing has to either tell part of your story in a professional manner, or be essential.
I feel like those perspectives are like really awesome and actually very true. I think it's also important to realize that anything that you do is going to have a consequence, and sometimes you just got to own it. I have personal and professional social media accounts, and I'll kept my professional account off private. And the reason being was that there was a message that I wanted to convey. I felt that I was a strong enough applicant, and I wanted the program that I was going to pick number one. I wanted them to feel like that this is the person that they were getting, and it was going to be an asset. And as a result, now that I'm here and I ended up at my number one program, it is an asset to them, and they want me to thrive in that way. And so, like, you got to take it with a grain of salt. It's like you got to look at your application, your situation. Is this like, am I going to be in the right situation here? Like for me, I didn't shave my beard. I knew that was going to exclude me from programs, but I didn't want to match at a program. And then I'm told that I have to shave my beard, and I got to do things outside of work too. Like, I got to go out and look good too. Like, I feel like I look better with my beard. And so that wasn't something that I felt comfortable doing, and that was okay. Had it been in a different situation where my number one priority was, maybe I don't feel as competitive, or maybe this isn't as important, or I want to get as many interviews as possible, then shave. I don't think there's like a right or wrong way, but like you got to figure out what it is that you want and know that there are going to be consequences for whatever you decide to do. One of my best friends, Master, his number one, he was locked up, but he also missed out on certain interviews. And we talk about that because he was locked up. I missed out on interviews because I had a beard, and that was okay to me. Just know there's going to be consequences as to whatever it is you choose to portray. And then regarding like the background too, I wanted to have like this really nice setup and all this stuff. And then I looked at my application, and my application has a lot of things on it. And I'm like, they're looking for reasons. Like, I'm a black man going into orthopedics. I have this application that has some things that like do not make sense as to why I may want to be an orthopedic. Have to prove myself in that way. I don't want my background to take away from my story. I don't want that to be the emphasis of it. So if you choose to have an elaborate background, the consequences, that might be what their focus is, and less on what you're doing. So what I chose to do was I chose I had a little flower, just one simple, nice flower, and it was actually a plastic flower. I wasn't going to try and water that thing. I needed everything to look the same throughout. And sometimes interviewers would ask, and it was something that I could joke about and I could just say, but like, again, the focus was placed on me, and that was the way that I chose to go about it. So you got to figure out what works for you, but just know there's consequences as to whatever it is that you decide to portray and convey.
Yeah. I just to second that, be cognizant of the strength of your application and know that some of those small decisions you make about your appearance, unfortunately, will in fact exclude you from certain programs. And you have to decide like, all right, I'm going all in and I have to be at a program that's going to support X, Y, and Z about my identity, or like, man, I got to make it. I got to get an orthopedic surgery residency and make it, for 5 years and get it to the other side. And I want every opportunity possible at my disposal. And so just make a decision and accept, the consequences one way or the other. And I think that will be best.
Oh, so I just want to say with the beard also, if you decide to keep it really, like there should not be loose hairs. Like have your barber trim it up and make sure it looks really, really good every single interview, because that's going to be verified. Keep your hair long, make sure it's trimmed up, your edge up is nice and clean, crispy all the time. It's going to be, again, really, really, if you go that route. Because I'm like, well, this guy's a beard and he's a shovel. Like he's representing the program. I don't want that. And again, it's going to be a reason to exclude you. So.
Very good responses, especially on this topic, because I feel like, some of our counterparts don't necessarily have to worry about this and think about all this so much. So this is Great answers on that question. So that's all we have for the pre-populated questions. A couple from the chat. Y'all feel free to keep adding them in the chat. First question is, as a Caribbean grad, how do you stand out and make sure you still show yourself as competitive?
That's tough. I mean, I think that research is kind of the currency of the field a little bit. And, you know, if you haven't done a research year, it might be something to consider. I have seen folks from, you know, programs that we don't traditionally think of as being successful matching into allopathic or orthopedic surgery residency programs be successful, like students from osteopathic programs, students from Caribbean programs. But, you know, it is a little bit of an uphill climb, and, you know, lean as hard as you can on the connections you have. And I think research experience kind of has a dual edge to it, where you build a relationship with a mentor and you're creating currency on your CV as well.
Two of my co-residents are actually IMGs. The thing about them is that their applications are stellar, but they didn't go in a direct path. They kept the bigger picture in mind. So just know, as a Caribbean grad, you may have to go through a longer process to get. But like once you're there, you're there. One of my friends went to a Caribbean school, and he had to do internal medicine residency or internship. Then he went and did pathology for 2 years, and he took time off, and then he did research for a year. And now he's a spine surgeon. And like he kept that in perspective. So just know like your route might be a little bit different. And you know, what you can, like, just go full throttle now. If you don't want to wait that long, like, go hard, like, do what you got to do right now. Get those papers published, like, make sure you're building those connections and do that. But just realize, like, it may take a little bit longer. It's just going to be a matter of how bad do you want it.
Yeah, and Harvard is a little unique in that regard. The IMGs they've taken, they're people that have done research years at the institution for the most part, either 1 or 2 years. But that's that pathway, right? Like that's that. I don't want to call it the back door, but like it is another way in. You do a year-long sub-I basically, and but it pays dividends.
Which is a whole nother webinar we probably need to have before March for sure. But I would second that. Even if you don't have red flags on your application, you guys, with the DO MD merge in the process, with the increase in applicants and the decrease in spots, we saw the lowest match rate ever for MDs last year. And then when you take the minorities or the people that are on this call, that rate significantly plummeted. And so to 54%, let's be clear when we talk about plummeted, what it plummeted to. The match rate in general was 77%, the lowest rate again that we've seen in the last few years. Usually that match rate hovers somewhere between 88 and 92, 93% for US allopathic MDs. And so what does that mean? That means that every single person on this call, I don't care how competitive you think you are, you need a backup plan before match week. And you need to already know your backup plan before match week. Again, this is a whole nother webinar. But if you do, I just want to put that plug in there. If you do not have one, no one, etc., when you don't match, if you don't match, it should not be a moment of panic where all the crabs in the barrel are fighting with the same few research spots that are available. There's never anymore a orthopedic spot available. I think 2 years ago, there were 2 spots. They were gone before the match list was even released, okay? So this is an area and a space that I work in, that I'm very familiar with. You should already know exactly if you don't match, even if you have a stellar application. I can't tell you how many surprises there were this last match cycle. When you don't match, there should be one phone call you're making to the person that you already have your backup plan with and say, hey, it happened, unfortunately, I need that job, okay? So make sure that you absolutely plan for that. However, all the things apply for the Caribbean person that wants to show their interest. You do have to work a little harder. You absolutely need to be reaching out. If you're not an MS4 already and in the application cycle now, you absolutely, like Dr. Pion had said, somebody reached out to him a few weeks ago, guys, and now is on his radar. So it doesn't take a ton of effort, but it does take effort. You have to own your own destiny if you know that you're in a position where you're already starting behind the blocks. But it's possible.
Next question, how should we answer the question, tell me about yourself?
Okay, so that is like probably my favorite question as I went through the process, because like a little known trick, at least when I was going through, was like, you can dictate the tone of your entire interview based on how you answer that question. Honestly, like for me, what I did was I created a really good elevator speech, and I practiced it. When I was in the OR retracting and, you know, no one's asking me any questions, I was practicing it. When I was driving, when I was walking, I was practicing it. So it was pretty much just secondary to me. And what I did was I loaded up the answers in ways where it told my story in the way that I wanted to convey. So like, you know, for example, my opening line was, since coming to America from Zimbabwe, I've lived in 8 different states as my family and I sought to take advantage of the opportunities the country has to offer. In doing so, I told them I'm adaptable. I'm willing to go anywhere and I can thrive in this situation. I have unique experiences. I'm from a whole different place. And so I have a story that you probably want to ask a few more questions about. And then I went into like, I have 3 things where I said, I'm passionate about this. So for example, I said, I'm passionate about leadership. In doing so, I addressed my MBA. I essentially said, you know, this is best highlighted by my decision to get my MBA as well as this, because now I'm telling them, like, look, I chose to do this for this reason. And I'm trying to tell y'all, like, hey, this is a positive and not a negative, and I'm going to own my story as I'm going through. You know, I talked about, I have a nonprofit organization that I started when I was in medical school. People are going to ask me, this is great, but like, how are you going to continue this as a residency, as a resident? And so I chose to address that right up front as I was going through. And then what I would do as I finished out is I would just like smile and I'll say, but hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to interview here. And like that can dictate the tone of the conversation, because they might have something they want to hit you with and you might have addressed it. Or you may just come off and like, you're happy to be here. You're not super nervous. And they're telling, that whole thing just tells a lot about you. So like, tell me about yourself. I saw it as a way to be like, hey, let me like show you who I am in a very like well-constructed manner. And we're going to make sure that you know that I'm going to come into this without being super shaky, super nervous. And I'm embracing this. Like, bring it on. Let's do this.
Everyone's going to ask you that question, right? So it's got to be a succinct practice speech that you give, definitely with poise and confidence, and make sure that it doesn't drag on too long. Have it in an amount of time that allows you to continue the interview and let them ask those interesting questions about your background. You know, I would say everybody's why is going to be different, but just have yours honed down. Make sure you explain why orthopedics, why you, in that little 1.5 minute spiel, finish on a high note and finish so that we can ask you more about yourself and why Duke or NYU or whatever is a good fit for you and your talents.
Yeah, so practically just think about 3 things that would describe you, that for you are what you want your brand to be, right? And hopefully these things transition into your residency as what you decide you want your brand to be as a resident, because you make that brand in less than a month, let me tell you. And then that's what they know, right? For the next 5 years, you are affirming or denying those 3 things with every interaction that you do. So figure out what those 3 things are, and then have succinct, clear, concrete, almost picturesque story-like descriptions that attach something about you to that word or brand. And I can't, echo enough. Definitely make sure it does not drag on. This is your 2-minute elevator speech. And I will tell you, in a Zoom session, 2 minutes is too long for one person to be talking uninterrupted. So it really becomes like a 40-second, 60-second speech when you're dealing with the forum that most of us will be dealing with for interviews. But practice, 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 practice. The ums have to go, the pauses, the weird intonations, the shaky voice. This should be the question that you nail. This should be, did you see the excitement when Tino started speaking? It literally rose up out of him, because this is the question that's like, yeah, this is my moment, right? I can literally show you a little glimpse of me. And so you want that to jump out of the screen, because if you can't get excited about yourself When somebody asks you about yourself, what in the world are you going to get excited about, and why should I be excited about you? So you have to be able at minimum to convey something about yourself in that 40 to 60 seconds that gives them a glimpse of you, is true to who you are, allows you to be confident, and allows you to show, you know, a little bit about yours. I can't tell you how many stellar things that are on our applications that we never even talk about. People that are Olympic athletes, it doesn't come up in their application at all. It's your moment. You don't have to brag about it, but I guarantee you, if you're an Olympic athlete, you have tons of things that a orthopedic resident requires and would allow you to excel. So be able to tell them a little bit about yourself and then tie that into why ortho matters.
Isaiah, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. Sorry. Thank you for the event, and it's just been great so far. I did want to ask, sorry, my name is Isaiah. I'm a third-year medical student at University of Chicago, and I wanted to ask specifically about contracts. And I don't know much about whether that's something you should ask, and I just wanted to kind of get advice as to how to navigate that, or if it's something that even should be brought up during an interview.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up because, you know, when I was looking through the questions ahead of time, one of them was what things not to ask. And like, I just don't know about asking, like, what's the salary? What are the benefits? You know, how much time do I have off in those short interviews where you're trying to showcase and convince people that, you know, you're a hard worker and that all you're thinking about is how to get in the OR and, you know, crush cases and bond with your residents in Excel. But every department has an HR contact, a program coordinator who has like nothing to do, like, you know, at NYU it was Randy Gadet. Like every program has somebody like that, that is not one of your faculty interviewers, but has that information and that you should use as a resource. I just think like when they're asking, what questions do you have? We always ask that, right? At the very end of the interview. I think if you're asking about how many weeks off you get during intern year versus PGY4, or, you know, what the salary is when it's in the brochure already, like to me, it's kind of like, that's what you wanted to use the time for. So those things are important and you should definitely take them into consideration. But try to use a different resource outside of those limited interviews that you have to get those answers.
Great questions, y'all. Any additional questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat if you don't want to raise your hand.
As we're kind of closing out, I just also wanted to kind of reiterate something that a mentor of mine wanted me to talk to students about. It was just like, kind of like the importance of preparing for your virtual interview should not be understated. Like, know your application, like everything on your application. If you have research papers and you have a ton of research, like print those papers out and read them again. I reviewed my application before every single interview because it was a new opportunity for me to like share my story and to be asked questions. And when you made your application, it's essentially a cheat code. Like you have these things down to a very concise answer. And when you're fumbling around trying to remember something that you wrote months ago in the setting where you have like 30 seconds to answer this question, it's just not a good look. And so like that level of preparation is just like so important, especially in these virtual interviews, because they're looking for all the small little things, like, and you not being prepared is a very small thing you can control.
I'll just put in, as we're wrapping up, just put a plug in for Duke. I don't think we're traditionally always thought of as a place that welcomes, you know, underrepresented minorities, but we are, you know, in my short time here as an attending, I can tell you, you know, both of the main trauma surgeons are Black males. You know, our third partner is a woman in orthopedic surgery. Erica Taylor is a giant, right? And she's here, and we're always looking for diverse applicants. And this has been an incredible place from the perspective of diversity and equity. And we want you guys. Maybe it's a little late now or this cycle. Hopefully not. If you applied, we're going to keep an eye out for you. But anybody a little bit earlier on in the cycle, please look at us. All right, because we're looking for you.
Thank you both. Dr. Chambers, do you have any closing remarks before we bring this event to a close, or Dr. Wells?
Dr. Chambers, please. Dr. Chambers, please.
Yes, sir. You know, I'm always going to submit first. All right. So 2 things really quickly. One is a technical one, which I am going to throw in there because I'm looking at people's screens again, and I know we're not in a formal setting, but lighting matters. Lighting particularly matters. If you have dark skin with dark hair, you want to be super conscious of that. So 2 things. One, there's a couple people, again, just look at everyone's screen. I think you learn a lot in these settings because when you're one-on-one, you don't get to appreciate how you're coming across, but you can appreciate it when you look at the mosaic in front of us, right? So there's a couple people that have dark lighting. There's a couple people that have colored lighting, and there's some people that have a light behind them. And if you have a light behind you, it's almost blinding, especially if you wear glasses. It hits off of your glasses and your head in a different way. And it's almost blinding to the other person on the screen, especially if you were the only screen that I'm seeing right now. So be super conscious of that. Get rid of light. Think of taking a picture, right? Anybody got an Instagram? Think about your IG shot. So get rid of any lighting that's in the back that can hit the screen and kind of blind them. I do have a ring light on right now. I'm going to show you what it looks like if I remove it, right? There's a totally different image and view here. And again, I'm at night. I'm in a relatively well-lit room, but not as well lit as with the ring light. It does make a subtle difference. If you do use it, you need to also play with exactly where you place it in terms of position. So there's that, and then colors. Play with colors, black and white, which are very traditional in-person suits. Most people wear a black suit with a white shirt, especially men. You want to be aware of how that comes across on camera. On camera, it actually is very stark, and it can hit a little differently. So if you're doing, I personally would recommend, again, play with it, know your colors. I personally recommend dark charcoal suits if you prefer to go on the darker side instead of black, a deep blue, and then that kind of lighter blue that comes in a lot of suits is always a beautiful, beautiful look on camera in particular. And then your tie. You want to be a little adventurous, pop a little color in there. Reds can be very stark, but reds with kind of that like grayish, whitish mosaic in it usually looks really good. But generally, I would stick with blues, grays, deeper colors like that. Okay, so that's the technical tip. The only other technical tip I had was talking about your background, whether it's books. A lot of people do a plant. You can totally do a plant. It will be inoffensive. I recommend something just a little step up, a little more regal, especially if you're well traveled. Put a globe there instead. It's a little different than a plant. And again, if you like to travel, it's a nice conversation starter. And it does show just a little more touch of poise, elegance, some grace attached to you. Again, you got to remember who your audience is. The last thing that I would say is I am so proud of how far you guys have come. I know that it feels like you still have a long way to go. There's a lot of anxiety attached to your future, but please know that there is a purpose and there is a plan, and every step of your journey is attached to that purpose and plan. So we are here for you guys as you traverse these waters, and show up and be your authentic self, because you guys deserve to land in a program where patients can benefit from what we uniquely bring to the table, that our counterparts and our colleagues, they bring something else to the table, and that is beautiful too. But we bring something that uniquely has been shut out of this field for a very long time. And so I do want you to show up confident in the fact that what you're bringing and what you're trying to sell is not, am I the best fit for your program and I need to convince them of X, Y, and Z. It's, hey, I have a purpose-driven identity here, and I just want to show you a glimpse of that so that we can partner together to help patients and fulfill my dream. So continue to do what you guys are doing. Know that we are so, so proud of where you are, and you have so far to go.
Well, with that, last comments from Dr. Chambers, I can't imagine that I can say anything that will be more appropriate than what you just said.
Call from
I am so excited to see all of you. 66 people still on the phone. I'm sorry about that. But I'm so excited to see the future. Every single face here represents the future. And I think that our future is in good hands. I'm here. We are here to help, to support, to rally around. And no other time have I felt alone, even though I'm from the Bay Area, California, far, far away from home. But it is okay because I got my brothers and my sisters right here. I can connect with anytime, all the time. So enjoy. Let's go forward. You all will do super well. Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Wells.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. And I just want to put a last minute plug. You just heard from Dr. Wells. So if you're not a member of Gladden right now, we're giving you this free, but you need to become a member and get more benefits. So if you're not a member of Gladden, please join us, go online and become a Gladden Society member.
Some additional things before too many people leave the chat. I know that a lot of people have left their emails in the chat, so make sure to copy that down before you head out. And we've recorded this session, so we will create a link to that recording and notify all of where we post the recording once we do as well. Okay, well, thank you all again so much for your time. Thank you so much again to the panelists for your time and your wisdom and your advice. And I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone.